Welcome to Tomorrow. I am Carrie Ann. I also have a Jared and a Mike. Now, today, what do we have in news?
We've got a drill far away back in action.
And we remember astronauts Alan Bean and Don Peterson.
Absolutely. And then later, Ben will be having an interview with Frank Bunger, who's the CEO of Orion Span. And of course, we take a look at your comments and questions from last week's show. This is Tomorrow, Orbit 11.22.
Good morning. How's everything up in the sky?
Now, before directly jumping into launches and news, I want to make sure we acknowledge our Escape Velocity citizens. These are the people who contribute $10 per episode. They get their name in all three segments of the show. They get early access to After Dark, and honestly, they get so much more. The list is exhausting. If you are interested in becoming a citizen of tomorrow, please head on over to patreon.com/TMRO. All right, so Mr. Mike, again, we like to do news at the beginning of the show, but we always like to cover the launches that we might have missed in this last week, which I guess is kind of part of news. So, Mike, tell me what's happened the last week.
Well, we almost didn't have any launches this week, but thankfully there was one launch earlier this morning from China. And China launched another one of their Gaofen remote sensing satellites, but this was a civilian launch. So it was actually a bit of a surprise that we didn't know more about this launch ahead of time. But in any case, this Gaofen was designated Gaofen 6, and it launched earlier today. Let's check it out. The sound is a little bit delayed because of the, oh, there it comes, because of the distance. But yeah, this launch occurred at 4:13 Coordinated Universal Time from the Jiuquan Satellite Launch Centers today, Saturday, June 2nd, aboard a Long March 2D rocket. The two-stage rocket placed Gaofen 6 into its intended orbit, and the satellite will mainly be used for agricultural resources and disaster monitoring as well. As a designed life of 8 years, and Gaofen 6 is similar to the function of Gaofen 1, but it has better cameras, and its high-resolution images can cover a larger area of Earth. It's carrying a single 2-meter panchromatic camera, an 8-meter multispectral camera, and one 16-meter multispectral medium-resolution camera. This project also had a CubeSat that rode along with it called Liujiao 1, which is a Earth observation satellite built by the Wuhan University, and it's a prototype for a constellation of 60 to 80 CubeSats that would potentially be flying in the future. And this was a 6-unit CubeSat that launched aboard with this. So that mission was successful, and hopefully we'll see a lot more launches next week.
Yeah, no kidding. That's always one of those things of like, I guess at this point, I just assume that there's going to be at least one.
Yeah,
right?
I mean, that's like that's amazing that we're living in this time now where it's like, if there's not a launch, that's a surprise.
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
Holy moly.
Interesting.
Yeah.
All right.
Oh, yeah. I forgot to mention, too, for those of you keeping track, this was the 16th orbital launch for China this year. So we got to catch up.
Nice. We need like a bing.
Yeah.
That's amazing. Awesome. So, Mr. Jared, as we transition into more traditional news, you were talking about curiosity drilling. What's going on?
Yeah, so there's been a long-standing problem with a very critical part of the most advanced laboratory that we have wheeling around on the surface of Mars. But luckily, they seem to have solved that. Now, we're talking specifically about Curiosity's drill, which has been sidelined since December of 2016, when torque sensors on it indicated problems were occurring during drilling attempts. So engineers on Earth at NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory developed a new technique that would allow Curiosity to drill again, and after months and months of exhaustive testing and analysis, those commands were uplinked a few weeks ago. The new technique allows the drill bit to extend beyond 2 stabilizer posts, which were used to steady the drill's bit against the target. Now, this is specifically called feed extended drilling. It also involves Curiosity's robotic arm, using it to impart additional force on the drill. So much like what you may do with drilling when you're working on your own projects, you put the screw in, you screw it in a little bit, and then you really put some force on it and you continue going. And that's what Curiosity's arm is going to be doing with this new technique.
So is that because like the rock is really hard and the Curiosity's too light? Like
The problem seems to be with the motors that are driving the bit itself.
Okay.
So it seems like they're not sort of rotating at the rate that they should be.
Okay.
So they checked to see if adding more force to it would actually allow it to rotate. You know, kind of grab the Martian rocks a bit better, and it did.
Right.
So that's why they went ahead and tried this out.
Gotcha.
And
Okay.
actually, just so happens, just a couple days ago, they drilled a 5-centimeter hole using this new technique into a rock called Duluth. And of course, now that they've changed the way the drill works, they also have to change the way that they grab the fragments of the rock from what's being drilled in order to be fed into Curiosity's onboard instruments for chemical analyses. So that's what they're going to be working on next, is to get all of that stuff you see around the hole there to actually scoop that up and get it inside of the chemical laboratory inside of Curiosity. And of course, Curiosity, it's driving up Mount Sharp and Gale Crater. It's sampling rocks as it climbs, finally again. And it's primarily doing this to get a record of how Mars' climate changed from a warm, wet world to the current cold, dry, barren, and seemingly dead desert that it is today.
Interesting.
So very good work to all the engineers at JPL. That's basically what they seem to do all the time, is make the impossible possible. So
quite.
is super cool.
Yeah.
That's really funny. Duluth. So Duluth speaks to my heart, as there is a Duluth, Minnesota. It's spelled exactly the same, so I don't know if if maybe that was why that was named that at all. But
Maybe.
I was like, did you just say like Duluth? Like, oh my gosh, that's hilarious to me. Awesome.
Yeah.
Duluth also relatively barren, although not a desert, but usually just covered in ice and snow.
Well, if it gets down to like minus 80 Fahrenheit, then it's got the sort of same temperature average as Mars.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. No, like legitimately, it can in fact do that.
Okay, what do you know? So
All right.
maybe we should just take well, I know what we'll do. We'll grab the engineering model
Yeah.
that they were using at JPL. We'll take it to Duluth,
Minnesota.
and we'll test it there.
Yeah.
So
I like this idea.
this is why we're here. So,
Although one question I have is has NASA not quite figured out are they going to have to come up with a new scooping method? Is the previous method no longer going to work with being
Yes.
able to sample it?
Yeah, so what they're trying to do, because of the way that this drills, it no longer makes a fine powder. It makes a fine powder with occasional large chunks of rock. Large meaning a couple millimeters in size, which is not something that the instruments on board of Curiosity or the systems to get it into the instruments on Curiosity were designed to handle. So they're working on that right now to figure out how to get this new amalgamation that they pull out of the drill, the borehole, to get into the rover itself. But there are some instruments on the end of the robotic arm that they can put up to what's come out of the borehole and still analyze it that way. Just not in as much detail as the instruments on board of inside of the rover itself. So, yeah.
Well, maybe we should go to Duluth, Minnesota to see if we can't help figure out a method to sample better with the equipment that they have.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Good way to do it.
Exactly. Of course, you guys are saying that, and I mean, Jared said negative 80 Fahrenheit. Like, that's cold.
That's very cool.
Yeah, that's
Yeah, that's
So be careful what
Anything
you're
below 60
volunteering for.
Fahrenheit, and I'm dying. I'm in a parka.
minus
Man.
62 Celsius, by the way.
Thank you.
So-
Minus 62 Celsius. Yeah,
So
that's
since I broke our rule here,
quite
so
cold. That's
Yes.
cold for sure. Oh my goodness gracious. All right. So, Mr. Mike, sadly, we have some sad news in the last week. Yeah, go ahead. I'll let you take it away.
Yeah, this is very sobering and humbling news. We lost 2 astronauts this past week. One Apollo astronaut and one shuttle astronaut. So, just wanted to go through and pay tribute to both of these men and the service that they provided to NASA. So first, we got to talk about Alan Bean. Alan Bean, who was a Navy test pilot, So he was one of the astronauts who walked on the moon on the second mission, Apollo 12. And he was also aboard America's first space station, Skylab. And after leaving NASA, became a very accomplished artist. And he died last Saturday on May 26th. He was 86 years old. Bean was only one of 12 men to walk on the moon, and 2 in each of the 6 successful lunar landing missions. He's survived by only 4 of the remaining moonwalkers. Buzz Aldrin, the pilot of Apollo 11, Dave Scott, the commander of Apollo 15, Charlie Duke, the lunar module pilot for Apollo 16, and the geologist and former U.S. Senator Harrison Smith, who was on Apollo 17, the final Apollo mission. Alan Bean was born in Wheeler, Texas on March 15, 1932, and earned a degree in aeronautical engineering before he joined the Navy and eventually won one of the coveted assignments to the Navy Test Pilot School. And in 1963, he was selected in NASA's third group of astronauts, along with Apollo 11 crew members Buzz Aldrin and Mike Collins, as well as Scott and Apollo 17 commander Eugene Cernan. The 12th and last man to walk on the moon. And after serving in the backup roles for Gemini 10 and the Apollo 9 missions, Bean was named the lunar module pilot for Apollo 12. And aboard their Saturn V rocket during their launch, some of you may remember that was the one where they had a lightning strike not long before the launch itself. But Bean and his crewmates, Commander Pete Conrad and Richard Gordon, blasted off on November 14th, 1969. And he would launch later to the Skylab space station in 1973 and logging a then record of 59 days in orbit. It was his final flight assignment at NASA as he was the backup commander for the Apollo-Soyuz test project in 1975. Alan Bean retired that same year from the Navy and from NASA in 1975. And as he continued to serve as the head of the Astronaut Candidate Corps and Training Group at NASA Johnson, before he retired from NASA, in 1981 to pursue his painting career full time, which you can see some of the amazing images that he was able to create with his unique perspective of actually being there. But not to be overlooked, we also need to talk about astronaut Don Peterson, who trained for a classified military space station program before becoming one of the first people to spacewalk from the space shuttle. He died on Sunday, May 27th, at the age of 84. He was born in Winona, Mississippi on October 22nd, 1933, and earned a science degree from West Point and a master's degree in nuclear engineering during his time with the Air Force, as well as graduating the Aerospace Research Pilot School. Peterson transferred to NASA in September of 1969, 2 years after he was chosen by the U.S. Air Force among their third group of candidate pilots to crew the Manned Orbiting Laboratory, the clandestine reconnaissance platform that was canceled. After it was canceled, it led Peterson and several of his other Manned Orbiting Laboratory trainees to join NASA's Astronaut Corps. And after arriving at the Civilian Space Agency in the midst of the Apollo program, Peterson, in fact, waited 14 years for his opportunity to fly in space, ultimately being named on the maiden flight of the Space Shuttle Challenger. So on April 4th, 1983, Peterson lifted off aboard the winged orbiter Challenger, together with Space Transportation Mission 6 Commander Paul Weitz, pilot Carol Bobko, and fellow mission specialist Story Musgrave. The 5-day flight included deploying the first tracking and data relay satellite, or TDRS-1, to support communications between the space shuttle in Earth orbit and mission control on the ground. And also during that mission, 3 days into the mission, Peterson and Musgrave made history by becoming the first astronauts to wear extravehicular mobility units, as well as exit through the space shuttle and go on the first airlock for an extravehicular activity. STS-6 also marked Peterson's only spaceflight, as I said, but during that time, he logged 5 days and 23 minutes and traveled 2.1 million miles while orbiting around the Earth 81 times. He resigned from NASA in November of 1984, but after departing the agency, continued to work as a consultant and advised crewed aerospace operations, and continued to work full-time through 1993, then part-time, and eventually retiring, aside from the occasional public appearance by the early 2000s. So I just wanted to pay tribute to both of these men, and we're saddened, of course, by their loss, but all the more to remember those that are remaining and the contributions that all of those who have gone before have made to the space program and to humanity's spaceflight journey in general. So.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm a little bit older, so those original the EMUs, as you were saying, the little sort of jetpacks, if you will, off of shuttle is something, that's one of those images that just totally sticks in my mind. And when I think about the space program as a whole, but particularly the shuttle era, that's one thing that I just always like that's what I think of, if that makes any sense. So that's that's very sad. But these men did really, really amazing things, and that was really cool. We have to switch gears.
Thanks for taking the time.
Yeah, of course. Just switching just a little bit, and a mystery, a good mystery, I feel like is always a good way to to change things up.
Yeah.
So now I feel like Rosetta. We've talked so much about Rosetta, but we're still learning things. Is that correct?
Yeah, this is sort of like our space pod a couple weeks ago talking about looking at the Galileo data from 1997,
Right.
over 2 decades later, re-looking at it and going, yeah, that anomaly? Oh, it turns out it was, water coming from Europa. So
Interesting.
yeah,
right.
so, when missions do their work, even when the mission is wrapped up, there's still 5, 10, 15, 20 years of analysis of the data still happening after that. And the European Space Agency's Rosetta spacecraft had a bit of a mystery regarding the jets that would come off of the comet that it was looking at, which is called Churyumov-Gerasimenko. And it took over 70,000 images of this comet by using the OSIRIS camera on board during the 2 years that it orbited the comet. And there were these outbursts of gas and dust that would occur frequently, but these outbursts were also seen to occur at regular intervals, which is something that we weren't expecting with that there. Now, viewing these images, the scientists from the Max Planck Institute of Solar System Research found that these outbursts occurred not just with regularity, but their locations were also regular as well, specifically at areas experiencing sunrise. Now, this early morning activity is due to frost, which would form on the night side of the comet, and then it would sublime rapidly when exposed to sunlight. There were also several areas that corresponded with where potential landslides had been observed on the comet's surface, likely causing frozen water below to be directly exposed to sunlight. But why do these outbursts form in very directional jets like this image you see right here?
Yeah.
They're that's immensely directional. That is like specifically pointed in a certain direction. It was expected that these jets would form a homogeneous cloud. In a vacuum, they should expand outward evenly in every direction. Well, they continued to do analysis of the photos taken from different angles of a region on Churyuri called Happy, which lay in the neck between the two lobes. And this allowed us to see that these areas were very strongly illuminated by sunlight, but also these areas contained pits and depressions in a concave shape. So these pits and these concave depressions, they ended up concentrating the shape of the gas and the dust coming out of it. So that's why they were directional, because the shape of the area where those jets were coming out of actually pushed them into directional jets.
So more like an engine bell, or no? Am I
Yeah,
thinking?
kind of like that. Sort of like a natural engine bell, if you think about it.
Okay.
It would kind of push them together, and then the particles would all stay together in that area, and then be ejected as more and more particles came out. So
Interesting.
yeah, so this was a really cool result. They ended up modeling it as well, and they found out that the models they developed based on the surface of Rosetta lined up exactly with what they were seeing from the images from the OSIRIS camera. So it's just another amazing result continuing from this mission, and a really great result too, answering something that we had no idea how to explain.
Yeah.
So,
Wow. That's.
Are we sure this isn't some sort of spaceship posing as an asteroid?
I mean, if you take a look at it, it really does look like a rubber ducky. So, so somebody could have lost their rubber ducky while they were taking a bath coming through the solar system, for all I know.
Gargantuan. Must be from a gas giant for sure.
Yes, I think so, because this is a multi-kilometer sized rubber ducky.
sorry.
So,
Wow.
yeah. But yeah, really
I'm
cool
sorry.
stuff.
It is really fascinating, though, that it resembles rocket pumps like that.
Yeah.
Sorry.
No. I mean, that's we're staying true to ourselves, to be honest. So
Yeah, I mean, what else? Yeah.
Oh, that's
It's just nothing
funny.
but a bunch of gas on this show.
Right? Yeah, exactly. That sounds about right. All right. So what we're going to do now is we're going to take a little bit of a calendar break. And when we come back, Ben will be interviewing Mr. Frank Bunger, who's the CEO of Orion Span. Stay with us. There's more tomorrow coming right up.
Look into her face, determination in her eyes. She won't give up or quit or This girl's a fascination, and nothing in her way will keep her from her destination. 'Cause she's fire walking, she's fire walking. When it's hot, she keeps on moving, through the heat keeps on improving. Yeah, she's fire walking, she's fire walking to be free.
Before we get into our interview, I want to make sure I still give a huge thank you to our escape velocity citizens. They get their name in the show in this segment, of course, and also want to acknowledge our orbital citizens. These citizens contribute $5 per episode. And if you are interested in becoming a citizen of tomorrow, please feel free, head on over to patreon.com/TMRO. Now we head over to the observation deck where Ben will be interviewing the CEO of Orbital Span.
Yeah, it's going to be a lot of fun.
Orion Span. I'm so sorry.
Orion Span. Actually, that's a really good point. So I've got Frank Bunger on the line, the CEO of Orion Span, and I think I'd actually like to start off by asking, is there a meaning behind the name Orion Span? That's kind of an interesting name.
Yeah, good question. Yeah, there sure is. So the name derives from the concept of the overall mission of Orion Span. The mission here is to take the first serious steps towards colonization of space. We're building a space hotel, but the real mission is to make visiting space routine and comfortable. And as we see prices start to come down, more accessible to everyone. So my view when I named the company was, well, you know, I want this to be the first step towards us thinking about colonizing space and potentially colonizing, you know, more broadly speaking, the Orion, just as a very broad sense.
So let's start kind of in a very high-level overview of why is colonizing space important?
Well, for me personally, and I'm sure your viewers probably feel the same way, there's no higher calling to me than taking those steps forward. And I feel that since the wind out of our sails kind of faded in the 70s after the Apollo program, there was this stretch of time where a lot of progress was made in understanding how human beings can live in microgravity thanks to the ISS. But you know, if you ask somebody in the 70s what would be happening in 2018, they'd say, oh, we'd probably be living in the moon or living in Mars. And these things didn't happen because of political reasons and budgetary reasons. But you know, what's exciting now is in the last 5 to 10 years, and I think we largely have to credit SpaceX for this, for showing that there's a way for a commercial entity to create a business in something that's expensive and hard, and actually make it profitable and highly successful. So sorry, to come back to your question more roundabout. So I think, you know, same as your viewers, that we all believe that human civilization's destiny is in the stars. Sooner or later, the Earth is going to give out, or maybe there will be a horrible war with far more horrible weapons than we have today. It's hard to predict the future. In either case, in any case, we want to be a multi-planetary civilization. And I think when you look at the history of how humanity has evolved and become the species that we are and achieved what we have, I think we have a natural curiosity that, you know, even if you set aside bad outcomes like horrible wars, regardless, even if it's a panacea and life is perfect, we want to know what's out there. We want to understand the universe. We want to understand dark energy, dark matter. You know, why are those stars and spiral arms not spinning away? Is there a way to travel faster through some other means and visit other star systems? So, you know, it's all, obviously we're in the early phases of that. It's 2018, but I hope to see that by the end of my lifetime that we're seeing people routinely living and working in space, in orbit, and the moon, on Mars. And I hope that that I can personally die in space as well.
So what is Orion Span doing to help start that humans living and working in space? What is that first step that you guys will be taking?
Sure thing. Yeah, so the product that we announced and for which we got a lot of attention is our Aurora space station. And as you probably heard, it's the world's first luxury space hotel. But more broadly speaking than that, it's obviously catered to tourists. But more broadly speaking, it is a human spaceflight platform. So we want to service space agencies, whether it's future ISS partners when the ISS retires, or other space agencies around the world. We want to host their astronauts. We want to host microgravity research. We want to help push the frontiers of those use cases. I personally believe that there are breakthroughs in microgravity research upon which we are just on the cusp. So when that happens, and when we find that, like, the killer app, as they say, for space, whether it's manufacturing or some other breakthrough, we're going to see a tremendous flood of activity. And if you hear the Bank of America estimates by 2040, there'll be 3 trillion economic activity in orbit. And today that's far, far, far less. So the goal here with the Space Hotel and having this platform is, let's put a piece of infrastructure up there and think of it as a piece of real estate, essentially. Just like a house or a building in a city, Aurora Station is a piece of orbital real estate. So we want to lease capacity on it to people that are interested, whether it's tourists or astronauts or research. And we also want to think ahead to one day that maybe people want to own parts of Aurora Station.
And so what are the plans to execute on this? Like, how, saying, hey, here's what we want to do. We want to build a space station. We want to make it so that we can do some research on it and make it as an orbital hotel. But that's neat. But it takes a lot of time, a lot of money, a lot of resources to make that happen. So how are you going to get from where you are today to actual operating space hotel?
Yeah, good question. So today we are concept complete and have a bunch of IP. And what we're doing now is we're going to be opening a larger fundraising round in the next few months here. But I'm actually pleased to report that there is a lot of interest in it because I think what we're seeing out there is that nobody has yet figured out how to do this more cheaply. This is, typically when you look at this is something that's going to cost. It costs government billions and tens of billions and even hundreds of billions of dollars. So, obviously government had different challenges and there were all these international partners. So it was a much bigger, more challenging project. But even when you look at some of our competitors, their cost forecasts are pretty darn steep. So our goal when we started the company was, could we drive this down below 100 million? Because if you drive, we reckon that below that mark, then we start to make this a venture fundable business. And that's exactly what we've done with some of the innovation is we found ways to make this far more cheaply than anyone has done before. And you also see that, part of it is the actual deployment of Aurora Station. The first deployment will be a single module space station. So that means it launches, it's in service right away. It's not, it doesn't require inflation, doesn't require assembly or multiple launches. The model I was thinking of when I started the company was, could we do something like a Skylab or a Mir in a modern version and make it a hell of a lot cheaper?
So to that, you mentioned a $100 million target, which is radically less than what anyone else is doing. Does that include the launch cost itself, or is that just for the station?
That does not include launch. So our goal with launch is to either barter our way to a reduced price launch or to partner our way to a reduced price launch. So either with commercial entities and or government.
All right, so got a couple questions from the chat room. So let's say we've got Aurora Station up, it's operational. Lure, from the chat room is asking, what kind of activities are you planning for your guests on the station as a vacation experience?
Yeah, good question. So it's actually, so I think one of the reasons that we struck such a chord out there and got so much attention is that what we're actually propositioning here for the tourists is an experience rather than a room in a hotel. When you look at some of the great work that Bigelow has done around the inflatable habitats, what they have not yet done is figured out how to market and sell what's actually going to be happening. Whereas we kind of did the reverse, where we started to market and sell this in advance, take bookings, and to make sure that the market interest was there as we expected. So to describe the experience, the goal is to have an authentic astronaut experience. So for very wealthy individuals, trip starts at $9.5 million. So it's expensive, but far less expensive than the 20 to 50 million other guests paid to go to the ISS. And so a big component is going to be training for starters before they even leave for Aurora. Once they get there, there'll be a completion of the training as well. There'll also be participating in research. So our goal is to, like the ISS astronauts, as you guys probably know, spend the vast majority of their time running research experiments. And so we want to have our guests have a taste of that as well, without it becoming their entire lives. Because obviously supposed to be fun too. So we're going to have them do experiments between 3 to 6 hours a day. And our goal is to make those experiments something that is easy enough to use, that it doesn't require a PhD in that particular field. Right? So it's more about the execution of the experiment rather than the deep knowledge of how it operates. And we also are going to have a VR experience, virtual reality experience. We're calling it the holodeck for now, as a nice Star Trek reference for everyone. But the goal there is that if, let's say, people want some downtime or they just want to try something interesting, in VR, anyone who's played with VR knows that anything is possible. You can play golf back home, or you can walk on the surface of Pluto. So there's that's a kind of an extra distraction. And lastly, we do expect that people will be looking out the windows an awful lot. There are portals all along the side of Aurora Station, as well as some larger windows in the center. So everywhere you look, you will always have a view of the Earth moving underneath you, thunderstorms, all that excitement. So we also expect that guests will spend a lot of time on social media and contacting probably everyone they know to say, like, hey, check this out. This is amazing. So that's kind of how we expect the days to round out. And we picked 12 days because I talked to some former tourists like Richard Garriott and Anusha Ansari, and they were telling me that the 10 days they spent was just not enough. So we're trying to balance what's the right number to have people up there without being too long up there either, that they can get home and get back to their lives.
I think citizen astronauts like Richard Garriott had helped pay for his trip because he went up on Space Adventures, I believe it was, on a Soyuz, and he went to Space Station, International Space Station. But I believe he helped pay for some of that by doing experiments on Space Station and actually having those people help fund him going to Space Station. And you mentioned doing experiments on Aurora Station. Is that something that will help the astronauts pay their way, or is that just something that's helping to bring the cost down to where it's at right now?
Yeah, great question. So that's a little bit of both, actually. So we expect that it'll help essentially subsidize the cost to some degree. But to your point, this isn't something I usually talk about too much because it can be a complicated topic. But you're spot on. The model that Richard used when he went to the ISS, he ended up nearly breaking even, is what he told me. So pretty darned entrepreneurial guy. So I reckon that there will be people like him that want to use this as a platform to achieve something. Maybe it's calling attention. Like, let's say it's a Hollywood celebrity that has a pet cause, or let's say it's someone like Richard that wants to do science, or somebody that wants to test some in-space manufacturing. So I do expect there will be people like that who almost operate as an agent for other companies and doing something that they want to try in microgravity, or just want to call a lot of attention to, because obviously especially the first few groups that are going to go up there are going to get a lot of media attention. So they have a really unique platform to do something with that, and it's very open-ended ultimately.
You've mentioned microgravity a couple of times, and in the chat room, Ciderite asks, do you have any plans for rotational microgravity modules? In other words, trying to create, I don't want to call it artificial gravity, but something along those lines.
Yeah, we certainly have talked about it. It's as I'm sure all you guys know, it's hard to do that well, and it is expensive to do that. So it's certainly something we want to do in the future, but for us, it's probably 5 to 10 years out, or maybe even a little farther. But that is certainly the ultimate goal, because I think, as everybody here knows, the ideal state would be to have some degree of essentially gravity through rotation, 0.6 to 0.8 g, somewhere there at least, so that it's more comfortable for everyone, and some of the effects of being in space long term don't start to hit you.
Kay McCoy in the chat room asks, are there other adventure hotels that you look at for inspiration for guest experience? Underwater hotels, treehouse hotels, that sort of thing.
Yeah, we certainly have looked at those, because exactly the same kind of thinking is that those are unique experiences. I think the underwater hotel, as I recall, didn't pan out, but there are those kinds of experiences are exactly the same kind of idea. We reckon that our customer is similar to that. They want to try something unique like that. And this is the personality type that wants to climb Mount Everest and do something special.
Kind of changing a little bit and going towards the technical side, Tawicked in the chat room asks, what kind of docking ports will the station have? Is it going to be a single type or multiple to accommodate various different types of launchers and capsule combinations?
Yeah, we're planning on, so the Aurora station, if you've seen the images, it's 2 cylindrical pieces with a central piece that's we're calling a radial hub. And that radial hub has 4 ports. So out of those 4 ports, this is still in planning phases. So most likely we'll allocate 2 to large windows and 2 to IDA, so International Docking Adapter. So we want to be thinking ahead to that is the standard to which people are going. And yeah, thanks for bringing up those images. And so as part of those adapters, we can also launch additional stations and spacecraft. So as we go from single module, like pictured here, to multiple, then we simply launch another of the same spacecraft and attach it. It's attached perpendicularly for balance and weighting. And that's the whole concept here, is that we want to start simple and grow with demand rather than let's build some extravagant engineering operation and pray to God that there is market demand for it.
So along those same lines, in the chat room, kind of talking about timelines a little bit, Sol asks, do you have a roadmap or a goalpost luxury hotel phase, such as a plan for a larger, more city-like station, or more of us common folk may live and work? But kind of taking that back, do you have a longer-term roadmap? Right? In the beginning, when we asked why, you had a very incredible and grand vision, but you have to start somewhere. So do you have like markers along the way that says, okay, well, we start with Aurora Station, and then where do you go from there?
Absolutely, yeah, and we certainly do. So what we're seeing is, as I'm sure many of you see as well, is that launch costs are starting to come down. They are not coming down fast enough for anyone's tastes, but our forecast is that they will be down to the low to mid millions to launch a human to space by the mid 2020s. So if we see that continue to drop into the late 2020s and 2030, and how exactly that will happen today is a little fuzzy, as I'm sure all of you guys know, because there are a lot of new players coming online all the time with cheaper, better, faster ways to orbit, and whether or not any of those will work out or how they will come in pricing is a little hard to predict. But when you think of this like any new technology, it starts out as being extremely exclusive. Even the first VCR was darned expensive. The first commercial flights were darn expensive. Over time, and in the early days, it's hard to foresee how that path unfolds, but it is inevitable. It is only a question of when. It is not a question of if. So what we're hoping to see here is by the late 2020s and the early 2030s that price has come down to the hundreds of thousands for a launch to orbit. So now it's still a lot of money, but it's starting to be at a point where people could foreseeably go up there and stay for a good portion, maybe a couple of years and return, or stay up there even forever. And by that point, our goal is to have enough of a station built up, so like Aurora Station, and we may end up having multiples. We'll have to see how the market responds and where demand goes in the next 5 to 10 years. But to have enough capacity on board and enough ability that people can take care of themselves and not get in trouble from being in zero gravity for too long. Or for that matter, maybe we can even have a gently rotating station by that point that people can be up there a sustained amount of time. So that's kind of the intermediate goalpost here. I think it's hard to predict how that will all unfold. So we have to see a little bit how things pan out over the next 5 to 10 years.
So I have another question from the chat room. I'm going to soften it up a bit because I think they asked it a bit aggressively. But do you have a rough timeline? This is from Vogon. Asks, basically, when do you expect you'll be able to launch? And then adding on to that a little bit, like what kind of launcher do you need? Because just saying, oh, hey, I need a low-cost launcher, you got everything from the Electron rocket, which is designed for like CubeSats, and I assume that's not viable, all the way up to upcoming rockets like BFR, New Armstrong, SLS. What classification of rocket do you need? And then do you have a rough idea? I realize it's early, but rough idea as to when you think you might be able to launch.
Yeah, sure. So the class of vehicle is something like a Falcon Heavy or the new heavy lift vehicle from JAXA. SLS should be able to do it. So there's a lot of potential partners there that we'll be using for launch. And what we're looking for to determine who that will be is ultimately, we'd like to have a more broad partnership agreement with whoever that will be, that they bring up not just Aurora Station, but also our guests ultimately, so that we can have a kind of a holistic agreement in place that covers all those pieces end to end, and therefore also negotiate a better price point for all of them individually. So that's the class of vehicle. In terms of timeline, we're aiming for 2021, late 2021, and it is an aggressive timeline. I know everyone thinks that. It certainly is. We think we can make it, but it's certainly a possibility it'll slip into 2022.
And also from the chat room, Loopy Dragon asks off of Twitch, how will you work with existing commercial partners? Will your station have room for expansion? For example, would you add something like a Bigelow BA330 to the system?
Yeah, absolutely. We would. So our goal here is to be one of the first players to introduce the concept of an ecosystem in LEO, because we know if you think back to the early days of the ISS in the late 70s and early 80s, it was designed with at least 8 purposes in mind, including manufacturing, research, fuel depot, manufacturing depot, et cetera, and kind of got whittled down to a space laboratory through just time, budgetary changes, and political changes. But now that we're in a world where there is a viable market starting to emerge in LEO, it's the reverse, right? Because we want to be able to host all these different areas in some capacity. And so we've been very kind of broad in terms of who we talk to and potentially partner with, because precisely that it is a piece, it's a building, right? So what happens inside of that building, there's a lot of things that can happen inside that building. And that's one of the things we're excited to see, because there are a million exciting different things for which people reached out to us that they would like to try in LEO. And it's very creative stuff. And there's even people thinking way down the road to like an Uber of space. It's like, that sounds great, but I think that's a little ways out. But you think we are really on that edge. And I come from the technology business. I wrote a blog about this. And the tech business, this kind of bloom of activity started to happen about 10 years ago. And what I see in the space business is that we are just on the edge of a similar bloom. Cambrian explosion. I took that from an Economist article called The Cambrian Moment. And we are really on that edge in the space business. It's going to be the same thing in five or so years, when we are up there and probably other players are up there competing for people's business. And there's all these opportunities. There's resource capture companies. There's going to be more in space manufacturing. What we're going to see is just a tremendous flowering of possibilities, and what all those are is hard to predict. And we're certainly excited to see it, and we're open-minded to having a BA330 or other of the Bigelow modules, because they serve a purpose. They are big, and they're valuable in their own way.
A lot of people who watch the show are in aerospace, and a lot of aerospace is used to the dreaded terms ITAR and EAR, and there's just a ton of red tape. So this question from the chat room from Space Geek asks, are you bound by red tape and regulations, or is your biggest difficulty just the technology?
Well, there certainly is red tape, as I'm sure you guys know. The ITAR is a big one. There are other ones from the FCC and the FAA. And it's also a little bit unclear now with the Space Council transitioning some of those responsibilities towards commerce. So it's all a little bit murky, and there's also a lot of gray area where items like somebody who gets launched to orbit has to be certified, but once they're in orbit, do they have to be certified? It's unclear. It seems the answer is no. So this is a case where the pace of the market is exceeding the pace of government. Not surprisingly, it always takes a little while. This is normal. It happens in every business. So our hope is to be there early enough to help define those regulations and partner with government agencies and make sure that they make sense. Right. What we're aiming for here is a symbiotic partnership like the FAA and the commercial airline industry, where they have found the right balance of regulations for safety's sake and keeping everyone happy, plus making it commercially viable and profitable.
How did you get into this? How did you decide, I want to build a space station? I mean, that's a big undertaking. What inspired you to do this?
Yeah, well, I come from the technology business, and my background, I've been in a variety of startups, software, hardware, manufacturing, and so I have kind of a broad base of experience, but I've done a lot of startups. So my expertise is in running lean, fast, and mean. And I think we've done a good job of that with our launch of product launch of Aurora Station, because we're at a concept stage and we've achieved a lot of attention and bookings out of it. So the reason I came to circle back to your question, the reason I came to it is because I reached a point in my life where I realized there are fewer good days ahead than behind, and I wanted to go back to doing something meaningful and chasing my passion. And space has always been my lifetime passion. I wanted to be a kid, and when I was a kid, I wanted to be an astronaut. But I was also one of those kids that got motion sick driving to the supermarket. So, I kind of realized early on that becoming an Air Force pilot and becoming a test pilot and becoming an astronaut probably wasn't going to work out for me. So I shelved those dreams for a long time and just returned to them later when I had a lot of work experience to which I could bring the entrepreneurial skills and all the various other skills I've learned as an executive manager to actually make this possible.
I also noticed on the website that one of the things you'll be deploying, or at least planning to deploy on Aurora Station, are space condominiums. Plans to move into one of your own space condos when those are built and ready to go?
Absolutely. Although, I'll be selling them first because we need the revenue. But yeah, definitely. The goal there is that, like I mentioned earlier, we really want to make this so that, let me frame it a little more broadly. Think of the gold rush and the drive westward in the 1800s in the United States. That was driven by a profit motive. Right? People were going out west because they thought they were going to strike it rich. So we want to similarly have a incentive and a motive for people to be part of Aurora Station. So if they say if they own part of the station, that's the space condo concept. More broadly speaking, just think of it as ownership. If they own part of the station, they now have an incentive to capitalize on that in some form, whether that means lease capacity or sit on it till the value goes up and sell it. A lot of possibilities there, and we want to be able to provide that type of experience, because the challenge here is that, unlike the drive westward, is there was land that you could just go and occupy legally, whereas in space there has to be a medium for us. Obviously, we can't just go up there and it's not going to work. So that's the goal here, is to be able to create that kind of shell or framework that people might be able to make a tremendous amount of money.
What is the number one thing that's acting as a challenge to actually being able to see this vision through at this point?
I'd say more than anything is the timeline, because it is an aggressive timeline, and we really want to get there as quickly as possible and be first. And what I've seen is that since we made our announcement and got a lot of attention for it, is that the other tourism players have started to pick up steam too. So, as a whole, that's great for the industry, and it's really gratifying to see that we kicked some of the bigger players, more well-funded players, in the butt, and basically got them to start moving faster. So I think on the whole, that's a terrific thing for the space industry and for really human civilization more broadly, trying to get to space and expand into space. But for us as a company, it's certainly challenging, because it now means that we have, we're still the black sheep in this race, and we have to fight harder and be faster and cheaper than all of them.
So before I get into our standard questions, I believe you announced the station, and then didn't you almost immediately sell out of trips right away or something along those lines? So,
yeah, we sure did. Yeah, the response was tremendous. So in the first 3 days, we already sold out 4 months of reservations, and 4 months is equal to 4 times 4. So we're talking 16 reservations. So the response was really rapid, and I'm really excited to see that.
But if someone wants to book a trip, they're still able to do that at this point? It just has to be a little further out?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, so it's a wait list, and it's the money's in escrow too, just to be clear, because we're not the kind of organization that's going to take people's money and run. It's in escrow. We can't touch it until it's close to launch time, and it's also fully refundable at any time. So we want people to feel safe and risk-free that their deposit is secure. Sorry, going back to your question, what was it?
Oh, well, I was gonna continue the question, which is, let's say we've got a viewer who wants to book a trip on Aurora Station. How do they do that? Yeah,
they certainly still can. So we're the last public figure I released was we're up to 22 bookings, and that was a few weeks ago, and I'll be releasing more information there. But so as we go through, there's more and more on the wait list. We naturally expect that some will eventually get a refund and not go. So, I would say if there are people interested, don't wait too long, because that wait list is getting longer. And I think the first probably 6 to 9 months are going to be the most exciting time, because anybody going will be getting a tremendous amount of media attention.
Oh yeah, I'm sure. And let's just say they're on station. Is there internet access on the station so they can take the world's most amazing selfie?
Yeah, there sure is. Yeah, and that's one of the points we advertise is we intend to have best-in-class internet service up there. And I had some critics tell me, like, that sounds stupid for what you're selling, but I think they don't understand that internet service in orbit is not cheap, and not easy to have a lot of bandwidth. But we intend to have really high bandwidth service available so people can live stream, video chat, really enable people to connect with their social media contacts, whether it's family, friends, or some other organization or motive there, that they can connect with those people easily and all the time.
Actually, and I know I'm supposed to be going to the standard questions, but let's touch on that just for a moment. You mentioned live streaming from orbit. That you are very correct. That is very expensive and hard to do. Do you have your own ground stations for that, or are you partnering with someone else for those ground stations?
Yeah, we'll be building our own ground station is the plan right now.
And mostly worldwide coverage, or I assume you'll have gaps over oceans?
Gaps over oceans, most likely, yep.
Okay, cool. All right, awesome. So before we let you go, we do have some standard questions that we ask all of our guests. No right or wrong answers, and just, first thing that pops into your head. You've kind of already answered one of them, but I'll try to get your answer out of it again. The first one is, what is your favorite space mission, past, present, or future?
My favorite space mission, as in, sorry, give me a little more context.
Just any mission to space that has happened before, is happening right now, or is slated to happen in the future.
I think for me personally, the most exciting thing to see would be seeing the BFR go to Mars, and I'm sure everyone's excited to see that. Let's hope it happens in the next 10 years.
Do you prefer human or robot exploration of the cosmos?
A mixture, really. I think robots need to be the vanguard to kind of probe things and check safety and evaluate. But ultimately, it's not inspiring to have a robot go land somewhere, right? It's been done now often enough that it's actually kind of routine, which is a great thing. But what is inspiring is when people set foot on a new planet or set up a base on a new planet. That is inspiring, and it's something that lasts for all of human history.
And the last question is, why space? Why space?
Also, a little more context on this one.
Just in general, why do you think space is important? Again, we kind of opened up with this, so you gave a really good answer up front, but like a one-sentence variation of why you think we should explore the cosmos.
Well, the future of human civilization is in space. It is inevitable. It is solely a question of when and not if. 100 years from now, we will almost certainly be living and working in space. So let's make it happen. It's the opportunity is there. The conditions have aligned correctly to make it possible. So let's do it.
Oh, I love that answer. Let's make it happen. That's the tagline for this show. Frank, thank you so much for taking time out of your Saturday. We really appreciate you coming on.
Yeah, thank you. It's great to be on the program, and good luck to you guys.
Great, thank you so much. All right, we're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, comments from last week's show. So stay tuned. We'll be right back.
Look into her face, determination in her eyes. She won't give up or quit or fall for little fashion lies. Filled with awesome expectation, this girl's a fascination. And nothing in her way will keep her from her destination. 'Cause she's fire walking, she's fire walking. When it's hot, she keeps on moving. Through the heat, keeps on improving. Yeah, she's fire walking, she's fire walking to be free.
Before diving directly into comments, I want to make sure that we give a huge thank you and acknowledgement again to our escape velocity citizens, and then our orbital citizens, and then of course our suborbital citizens. These are the people who contribute $2.50 per episode. Every little bit helps, and we wouldn't be able to continue making these awesome shows if it weren't for you. Now, if you would like to become a citizen of tomorrow, head on over to patreon.com/TMRO.
I missed this question in the chat room with Frank, and I wish I hadn't. It's
Yes.
from Smokey Durg. He
Yes.
says, would you be open to the idea of including the station on Airbnb?
That's true.
That would be
Let's
great.
remember that.
Wouldn't that
Yeah.
be great?
Don't
That
be
would be-
loud though, or your neighbors are going to
Yeah, your space station neighbors. I'm sorry.
Wow. You're not sorry.
Only if they're in the module next door.
Just because your pack says commander does not mean
My
that I
pack
don't
does-
have
it
command
does-
of this show.
It does actually say.
What am
you
I
won't be able to
today?
see it. I think you're
You're
MS1.
MS2.
Yeah, I'm
so
mission
CM
specialist too.
Commander.
Who's MS1?
Mike.
Mike is MS1.
Okay, so I have to listen to
That
Mike
would be-
today.
Yeah.
Yep.
And then, but overall, we have to listen to you.
Well,
No,
but
we don't. Because
MS1.
I am Capcom.
No, but okay, we'll get into that. We'll get into that in after
Is
dark, but
MS1 in charge of red team and MS2's in charge of blue
Blue
team?
team.
No, you're just a specialist, so you're
Oh,
you're in
okay.
charge of your special area. He's in
Okay.
charge. We'll get into that in after
Cool.
dark. Continue.
Wow, thanks. I'm allowed to speak. That's fantastic.
Says the commander.
Capcom. I'm Capcom. I tell you what to do on station. You understand that.
But ultimately,
that's actually the way
we'll
that
get
this
into
works.
this in after dark.
Actually,
you're gonna want to watch after dark. This is gonna be fun.
If we want to be like officially official, the flight.
Let's go.
Yeah.
An
Okay.
official-
Yeah.
official
Let's.
flight?
Let's.
Okay.
I think Doug is showing us who has the real power.
Apparently the ocean, so that's great. So last week on Orbit 11.21, Mr. Jared here had a fantastic interview from the Riverside Telescope Makers Conference.
Ooh, that was so much fun.
Yeah?
Live in the middle of nowhere.
Yes.
Yeah.
Truly.
And you still had bandwidth somehow.
Yes.
Boom.
Well, thank you
done.
to the Riverside Telescope Makers Conference for making that bandwidth happen.
That must have been. It must have been expensive.
I don't know.
They brought in a satellite.
Maybe.
Oh my goodness gracious. Okay, so all of these comments come off of YouTube, so I'm just not going to say that a million times because it's super annoying. So the first comment comes off of YouTube. Man, there you go.
Right. It's habit. I bet you're going to say it every time.
Brain.
We're going to try not to.
Brain.
I know, right? From Fenton Bevon says, still no telescope network so we can watch the International Space Station 24/7 from Earth. When will this be a thing? Could get the science classes across the world to live stream it. What do you think?
False. Live
Wow.
view from space in high definition right here. This is actually using the ISS above. You can just a little Raspberry Pi. Jabri Jew, we had Liam Kennedy on talking about ISS above. This is actually just routed right into our video system.
Yep.
But you can grab your own ISS above that actually does have live views of space. It's perfectly designed for schools in that exact application. It will show you not only live views from space, showing like you can see part of the ISS. Is that a Soyuz capsule?
That would be a
Soyuz.
Soyuz, and
Yeah.
it looks like an orbital
And
ATK
that
Cygnus.
circular solar panel there is from the Cygnus as well.
So there you go, live view from space over the North Pacific Ocean.
North Pacific Ocean.
Yeah, North
Yep.
Pacific. Well, we have VU meters on top of it, so all I saw was
just
Earth,
Oath.
Pacific Ocean.
Oath, Pacific Ocean.
Right. So how awesome is that? I don't think we need it to be a telescope because we don't want it to be any closer to the Earth. Maybe the world's largest microscope. So reference.
Well, we got lots.
We'll get into that
We got
a little
lots
after that. And it will also show you, like I said, passes the International Space Station, so you know when to go outside, so that you can see it. It's really awesome, and you just plug it into the network, and then plug it into HDTV, and off you go. If you don't want an ISS above, you can just go to the high definition Earth viewing experiment, and they've got a live stream on. Is it UStream? I think is where they put it. Yeah, they got a free lot. You just watch it on UStream in high def. You can just see views of the Earth. Basically 24 hours a day.
So the chat room is blowing up at the moment.
Must be authorized on NOAA.
Tartar Sauce says, not what the comment meant, guys. And Destructor1701 was so upset he's misspelling things. Says, this is from Orbit, Ben, not from Teoscopes on Tiggram, which I assume means not on the ground.
All right, that's fair. Okay, that's fair. Watch the ISS from Earth, but I would argue that why?
Have you seen photos that even the best telescopes on the ground have taken of the International Space Station?
They're blurry and crappy.
They're blurry, they're crappy, they don't look good. Tracking it is immensely difficult. Getting all that data together is immensely difficult.
It doesn't make sense to me.
No.
All right,
No.
so okay, yeah.
No.
Chat room does the blah blah blah. But yeah, I don't think that. If you want it, ultimately, if what you're trying to go for is the core of I want to be able to see the ISS from Earth, blah 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 blah. This is what you want right here. And I know it's not exactly what they're asking for, but this is what you want.
That's still amazing.
This is
Look at
actually
that.
what you want right here.
Correct.
Yeah.
Yes.
Look at that. That's a football field sized laboratory moving at 8 kilometers per second, and we're getting live video from it. How amazing is that?
Yeah, so Anon says, yes, I've
Holy
seen
smokes.
it through a tracking telescope. It's very cool. Sure, it's not great detail, but that's not the point.
Salt42 says NASA YouTube runs it now. Yeah, from YouTube. Yeah, so you definitely have options there for sure.
Oh, they're disagreeing with whatever. Here you go.
Okay, I'm just gonna say everybody's like telling me like, oh yeah, I've seen it through my telescope before. All right, well let's coordinate telescopes. You coordinate the telescopes on the ground track, and you tell us how easy that's gonna be to do that for 24 hours a day, 7 days a week.
Yeah. Well, you're not going to be ocean.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, I
Speaking
mean,
of
look,
ground track, brilliant.
Look.
Thank you, ISS above. That was brilliant timing. So giant swaths of water where you're not going to have any sort of internet / coverage until some of those space constellations are.
Yeah, no, it ain't happening.
Anyhow,
So.
and I'm not sure that. I'm of the opinion that what you really want is that high definition Earth viewing pass because that actually. All right, let's just move on.
I just want to throw in there that if you are interested in like a telescope network that actually does allow you to watch live streams of it and even go in and potentially you take over the telescopes later on down the line. SLOOH, SLOOH, is a fantastic organization that allows you to do that. And I'm talking like research quality telescopes that you on the internet get to go in and control, and that's pretty amazing.
I think that's far more valuable than telescopes just tracking the ISS from the ground.
Yes.
Because that ultimately that's going to get boring after like 2 minutes,
Yes.
right? Because it's not going to be a great view of the ISS, and there are way better ways to do that. For example, high definition Earth viewing. But what you can do there is you can be like, okay, here's the ISS, right? Follow that for a minute, and then be like, and now here's Saturn. Or whatever happens to be in view of that particular telescope at that moment in time. So you can actually move it around and see things that you're interested in seeing. So I think that's a much better application.
Yeah.
Where can people go for that again?
You can go to slooh.com, which is SLOOH.com.
Cool. There you go. All right. Next up, Capcom.
All right, comes from SP 123 1000 because that's just the way it's going to be. I'm sorry. Says, is there an optimum orbital altitude for LEO or low Earth orbit? I was wondering how far an object could be orbiting from Earth and still be considered to be in low Earth orbit. For example, is there a reason why the International Space Station was not built at a higher orbital altitude as to reduce the need for reboosting every so often? Thanks for another great show, guys.
There are many things that go into the determination of where an object is going to be in space. The International Space Station is an interesting example of lots of compromises.
Yes. I was just about to bring that up. So.
Right, because it had to be in a position where both U.S. and Russia could control it. It had to be close enough where they could get to it easily from a Soyuz and from the space shuttle. So you can't go too far away, otherwise your rockets can't get to it. But the closer you are to Earth, the more atmosphere you're going to be pushing through. Now, so 75% of the Earth's atmosphere is within 11 kilometers of Earth, which is about 6.8 miles. However, the exosphere actually extends to over 10,000 kilometers. And that's the topmost layer. And that's what kind of merges into interplanetary space. So 10,000 kilometers out there is pretty far out. Yeah,
yes.
That's not something that I think we're going to want to put humans on, and actually, at least not today. Not using the technology we had when we were building the International Space Station.
Presently, there's no actual reason to put it at that kind of an altitude.
There might be in the future for lunar stations and things like that. But again, it all comes to engineering trades as to what you actually want. This is actually a great graphic. I forgot to give this an identifier, but this actually came off of Wikipedia. So if you search Wikipedia for it's like a low Earth orbit or I think it's Earth atmosphere, you'll actually come up with this graphic, and it's actually pretty neat because it shows you low Earth orbit, which we talk about a lot, right, on the show, because we have a lot of things that are low Earth orbit, polar orbit, still considered low Earth orbit. But then it also shows you the large span of medium Earth orbit. That huge green bar kind of in the middle is considered medium Earth orbit, and then that teeny tiny little red area on the right-hand side, that's high Earth orbit, and that's where generally things going to other areas like the sun or whatnot would generally be dropped off somewhere over there, something like that.
Yeah, and you don't necessarily have to take a very high orbit to actually do what you want to do. Like the European Space Agency's GOES spacecraft was designed to fly through the upper atmosphere with a little ion engine pushing it forward in order to measure the Earth's gravity field in minute detail. So So you don't necessarily have to actually go above, that 160 kilometers. You can even dip down into it if your mission really calls for it.
And 160 kilometers, that's kind of the magic number. That's 99 miles, and that's where you will experience very rapid orbital decay or atmospheric drag from the thermosphere. So you want to be above that, generally speaking, and then whatever your spacecraft will allow you to get to. So the higher up you are, the less atmosphere you're going to have, and it's not like it's a gradual decay. I want to say that once you're past that 75%, it's fairly gradual out there, right? So you really have to go pretty far. Go ahead, Mike.
Something else to consider too with the orbit that the space station is at, not just the inclination so that we can reach it easily with rockets and at its specific altitude, it's around 500 kilometers up, but somewhere between 700 and 800 kilometers, I'm sure the chat room can correct me on this, is where the Van Allen radiation belts start. So if you're going to have humans on board, you want to make sure that they're below that line where the radiation belts start, and that's kind of the other compromise.
Yeah, ISS is currently generally protected by our magnetosphere for things like that.
And even in low Earth orbit, you still have to deal with the South Atlantic anomaly as well, which is an anomalous area where those belts do really actually dip down to those altitudes that things are at. Like for instance, I know the Hubble Space Telescope at its orbit, when it flies through the South Atlantic anomaly, they do not do any observations at that point because you're just going to get noise in every instrument. So yeah.
Is the Hubble Space Telescope also considered to be in low Earth orbit?
Yes.
It's, yeah.
Okay, cool. It was
Mike
something.
seemed disappointed by that.
Yeah, the Hubble Space Telescope is at 540 kilometers above the surface of the Earth, so it's able to do that.
I forgot, where's JWST being dropped off? It's quite a bit further up.
James Webb Space Telescope?
L2, right?
Yeah, that'll go to L2, which is 1.6 million kilometers.
So a little further?
Or Earth Sun L2.
Just a wee bit further? Just
Slightly.
Just a couple steps?
Slightly. Yeah, it's far enough that it has to work.
Which is then considered to be medium Earth orbit, is that correct?
No, that'd be past high Earth orbit.
It's past high Earth orbit. Okay.
That's a Lagrange point.
That's
That's
it's
solar orbit, basically.
It's 4 times the distance from the Earth to the Moon.
Perfect.
So, yeah.
Thank you.
So no pressure.
Yeah.
So
that's why they need to catch these problems on the ground, right?
well, that's why I'm glad they're catching the
yeah,
problems
no
on the
kidding,
ground.
right?
So
yeah, exactly. Now's the time, because once it's in space, you don't have another shot. Yeah.
Can't service it either.
There is no Hubble servicing mission on the J. Yeah,
because
no,
your servicing mission will actually damage the telescope beyond repair just approaching it. So.
Just approaching it.
Oh yeah, the gas that you would come out of your thrusters, it would depose right onto the mirrors because the mirrors are so cold. So you cannot approach it with any vehicle.
That's
whatsoever.
amazing.
Yeah.
Do they have the ability? Let's just say. Okay, no. Let's just move on.
Okay, let's not think about these nightmares.
Let's pin that. Actually, I want to know if they can fold the mirrors back up. If they figure out how to get its servicing mission there.
No, those are single deploy systems. So yeah, that's why it all has to work.
Good luck, NASA.
It's gonna take a month to get it all.
If anyone can pull this off, it's NASA.
I do believe that.
Absolutely. Yeah. They've shown time and time again that they can the big crazy projects. They're the ones who can pull them off.
Yep.
All right. Cool. Next up.
Next up is an interesting one. This is from Ice 9 Project.
Yep.
Says, this is in a couple parts. Says, Ben, could you be more of a shill, please? I love all the interest being sucked out of the room. You actually responded saying shill for new space companies, because I do indeed love the lot of them.
I do.
I know. And then Ice 9 Project came back with, quote, China/Blue Origin, not sure which one.
Come on, that's funny.
It is a little bit funny. It says, sure, there's this disclosure, but haven't heard the same jabs taken at SpaceX. Honestly, there's no reason to take shots at any of them. They're all taking huge risks and should be equally applauded for doing something our own government has practically left to shrivel on a vine.
Okay, so
that's a loaded one.
There are definitely a couple of things here. Really quickly, I would like to defend Ben a little bit, which you know I don't do. So,
rare moment here, guys. Pay attention.
Right, the context of the China Blue Origin, not sure which one, statement itself came out of you were giving an example of where something had happened, but we didn't hear about it until after it had already happened, and it was like, had been like a couple of weeks prior to that. And typically, generally speaking, the majority of the companies, if you will, that do that have a tendency to either be China or Blue Origin.
Yeah.
It's a very rare occasion when ULA launches something, and then 2 weeks later they go, hey guys, by the way, we did this thing. Everything is anymore typically done live or as close to live as possible, which is where that comment particularly was coming from. So that's where that is. It's not, whatever. But you had a...
Yeah, no, I see two sides to this. So I actually do agree in some regards, and I disagree in other regards. You need to understand, I can't talk to SpaceX. So you don't hear me saying good or bad things about SpaceX. You don't hear me talk about SpaceX at all. You hear other people talk about SpaceX. I can't talk about SpaceX. So I don't. So taking the views of the show and being like, oh, well, Ben said that, I can get where that happened, but it's not me, right? So it's very rare that I can say anything at all about SpaceX. And that is due to what we will call a conflict of interest. So, and that's actually why we brought Mike on the show, right? We want it, SpaceX is doing things in space. We can't just ignore them because I can't talk about them. So we have Mike here who can talk about them and who can say cool things. And so it's his voice that you're hearing with regards to SpaceX. And I don't disagree with what he's saying. Yeah, and actually Dada brings up a very good point, and I think this is where I'm unfair to Blue Origin, and I will own up to being unfair to Blue Origin, which is, to be fair, lots of Grasshopper development flights were published after the fact. And Blue Origin is not in operational flight status right now, right? They are testing their rocket, and they are showing us their tests. And that actually is very cool and very awesome of them. And we do actually appreciate that quite a bit. It felt like, just emotionally, it felt like Blue Origin kind of didn't tell us anything forever, and then they would do a test, and then after, a couple weeks later, be like, "We did a test. Here's a video." And we're like, "Neat." And that's where that jab came from. And you are right. It isn't actually fair to them because they are in development, and I shouldn't put a different standard on them that I do for everyone else. So that is fair. So I will watch for that in the future because it's not fair to Blue Origin, and they are in fact doing amazing and incredible things.
And it also ends up sounding like an inside joke that is something that we want to be inclusive to everybody.
Yeah.
We have often for many years joked that Virgin Galactic is flying in just 6 more months kind of thing. But this is not easy. There's a lot of testing that has to be done. There's a lot of double checking and all of that stuff. Like, that's why there's the joke of like, well, it's not exactly rocket science because rocket science is hard.
Right.
Okay, that's the whole deal. Go ahead, Jared, if you want to add anything there.
Oh, I was just going to say, there's just so much happening of late that sometimes it's easy to forget about, how all of this goes. I mean, 10 years ago there wasn't this much to talk about.
Right.
I mean, there was like, it was sort of this idea that these companies are here, but they're probably going to be gone in about 3 to 5 years because that's the average shelf life of these companies.
Yeah.
And they're starting to build hardware now. Okay, so that's how it's going.
Exactly.
Oh, they're flying.
Exactly.
Huh.
Yeah, for sure.
So.
Lur has an interesting point, which is how many Blue Origin exploding rockets have appeared on YouTube? None. Because as far as I know, they haven't. Well, they did destroy a test
They had
stand.
one.
Yeah, a test stand.
Yeah. But how many test stands do you see anyone?
Video of it?
Yeah, but you don't see anyone. A lot of companies have had problems like that, and you haven't seen that from anyone. So I don't think that's a fair comparison.
Yeah,
Tawick brought up earlier. SpaceX's orbital. They show all their orbital launches. Blue Origin is suborbital, and they haven't broadcast all. But again, they're in a testing regime right now.
Yeah, I was going to say, in testing, you don't necessarily have to throw everything out there. Some of the things that you're doing might be proprietary, and you don't want that out there. So
yeah, so it was. You kind of hit it. It was kind of a funny inside joke. It was meant as a joke. But I think... Hi, Lisa.
Be quiet.
This is what happens when you have a space and a science show side by side. So, all right, let's...
Well, she is in New Zealand. So, all right,
there we go. Now we have the Earth.
That'll work for a while. Sorry, Mike. Next comment comes from Old Gamer Noob saying, still fighting about why to have a human head on a space robot? Just think of a VR headset and remote operation capability. There, done.
I don't know.
I don't think I think that's a perfectly good point, though.
Sure. I mean, that's not what Robonaut was designed for, though. And ultimately, that's what again, context is king. That's what we were talking about.
We were talking
fine.
about Robonaut was designed in the 90s.
Yeah. There was no VR. Yeah, exactly.
That doesn't mean there can't be in the future.
Yeah,
Yes.
but that's not what they were. Sure.
Oh my goodness, fine. Okay, so before we leave, I want to make sure that I also acknowledge our ground support patrons, citizens, I apologize. Well, patrons too, I guess. Man, oh,
Well, there's no more maker support, so
man.
there you go.
These people contribute $1 per episode, and again, every little bit helps. They, of course, get their name in the show and the acknowledgement from everyone here on Tomorrow. If you are interested in becoming a citizen of Tomorrow, please feel free, head on over to patreon.com/TMRO. I sometimes like to speak a little bit slowly so you can actually find your name there. Next week,
Yeah, that's a lot of names on there.
there's a lot of names
Actually,
on there.
this is a very oft-requested guest. And
Yes,
we kind
I'm
of
excited about this.
we have
So-
Isaac Arthur coming on, who's going to be talking about futurism, and we're specifically because he goes, Tomorrow talks about kind of the near-term future, right? In the next 5, 10, 15, 20 years. Isaac goes, millennia
Yes.
kind of thing, right? Way out there. So he's like, he's beyond tomorrow, right? He's next year. His show should be next year without any of the vowels. So what we're going to do is we're going to talk about some of those really far out there concepts and then pull it backwards and see what steps we need to take today to get to those things in tomorrow. I think that's going to be pretty cool. I'm excited to have him on.
Clearly, because I'm Capcom, and you just took over the show, so that's cool.
I'm commander. I'm allowed.
Nope, you're not. Any case,
I just remembered I'm not going to be here.
oh no!
I'll watch it. I'll watch it on
Watch it
demand.
live. Or you can watch it live.
So I
And
could.
or like submit your
from
questions.
the middle of nowhere, though.
Pre-submit your questions.
Okay, I'll pre-submit some questions. I'll throw some things.
All right, that's it. We're good.
We're good.
You
Yeah.
sure?
I'm
Figured
sure.
I should double check with you. Dada, is everything okay on your end? Yeah, fantastic, great. Thank you for joining
that
us.
was the show.
Exactly. Thank you for joining us. We should have a science up next if you are watching live, and if not, why not? You should be watching live. In any case,
So angry.
What's your problem?
well, it's misdirected. It should be at you.
Wow.
This is why you watch
Mommy
live.
and Daddy are fighting
Oh
again.
my goodness. We'll
Mommy
see.
and Daddy are fighting again.
We'll see everyone next week.
Bye.